It's been obvious since 2016 that Trump wants to improve American relations with Russia. And that is one of those fault lines where either you want to work with the Russians or you want to destroy Russia, because the empires, the colonialist system of governance cannot tolerate a rival. So they've been, for more than 200 years, they've been completely obsessed with destroying Russia. What is Trump doing? He's talking to the Russians. He's meeting with them. He has had, I think, at least 7 telephone conversations with Vladimir Putin since he took power. Compare that to 0 diplomatic contacts between Biden administration and the Russians. Since 2022. They did have diplomatic relations in 2021, but none since the war in Ukraine started. Trump is doing, by the conduct of his policy, the actual conduct, the actual effect of his measure, he's showing that in that divide between two systems of governance, he has turned course away from this globalist empire, from this colonialist system of governance. And if you listen to the rhetoric, if you listen to his statements to the press, public declarations, that it all seems very confusing, but I think that's part of the psyops. And there are reasons for those psyops, because the whole post-World War II period and pretty much the whole 20th century, the United States has been allied with the United Kingdom and with the European allies. And that has been entrenched into the mindsets of not only the policymakers in the United States, but also in the public. It's become a cultural fact. But going back to the really important question, whether I still am positive about what's going on or not, I am. And I'll explain why. We are in the blizzard of psyops. And I see that very many people, even people who are very learned, very experienced, and are paying very keen attention to events, are not sure what's going on. They have a hard time deciphering the events, particularly Donald Trump's intentions. And so I think that what's really important to keep in mind always as the foundation for any kind of an analysis is the very accurate characterization of the conflict going on in the world today as a conflict between two systems of governance. And I didn't invent this. This was repeated by many Western officials and decision makers and leaders, including George Soros and Kurt Walker, of former U.S. ambassador to NATO. And they characterize it as democracies versus autocracies. I think it's the truth behind it is that it's a Western colonialist system versus everybody else. And Western colonialist system is something that has a 500-year continuity, and its origin is Western Europe. And still to this day, its spiritual, its strategic, its philosophical headquarters is still Western Europe, the city of London in particular. And so the logic of this conflict imposes on anybody involved that you have to choose sides. You can't be mostly on one side, but a little bit on this side. You have to be either completely in the colonialist camp or you have to be completely against it. More than 20 years now, since 2003, for 22 years now, Russia and Vladimir Putin have been demonized in the United States and generally in the West, nonstop, 24/7, zero nuance. It's Vladimir Putin is evil. He's a murderous thug, an autocrat, a dictator. He kills journalists and on. He's going to overrun Europe, blah, blah, blah. And Trump can't come out and say, hey, I'm just going to flush all our European allies, all these wonderful people in the West, down the toilet, and I'm going to make friend with this evil dictator. It doesn't quite work. He can't do that quite exactly the same way. So therefore, you need psyops, misdirection, deception. Look, it was just very short time ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago that he was saying how terribly disappointed he is with Vladimir Putin. But now he's invited Vladimir Putin to Alaska for a meeting. And what does that tell you? It should tell you that their staff, and this is another thing what I have to say, I've been correct, because I've been saying that I think that the contacts, that the cooperation and the coordination of policy between the Trump administration and the Kremlin is far more extensive than we know. And then we found out from Marco Rubio that there have been a series of secret meetings between the two sides. They didn't tell us what it's about. All they tell us is, we want unconditional ceasefire. I don't think that's the truth, because unconditional ceasefire is so obviously unacceptable to the Russians that this has been going on since the beginning of Trump administration with General Kellogg, right? He's been going on with this, oh, we have to get the Russians to accept unconditional ceasefire. That would be like if you're in a boxing ring and you're beating your opponent to a pulp, and then somebody says, no, stop, we have to stop the fight. We're going to continue the fight in 1 month's time, but now you have to stop. Of course, the side that's winning doesn't want that. They want to finish the fight there because they're already winning it, maybe another few punches and it's all over. Whereas if you give them a month, they will recover. They will train themselves up. They will maybe rethink their strategy and their positioning. And so you've practically given up on your hard-won victory. And I think that to Western Europe and to the British, the only thing that's important is Ukraine. And this is why when it comes to the issues in Ukraine, Trump is pronouncing a whole lot of nonsense and bullshit because he still wants leverage over Europe and the UK, meaning they want him desperately on their side. They want him desperately to remain on board on Project Ukraine. So they are willing to agree to almost anything, as we saw 2 weeks ago in Scotland when Trump summoned Ursula von der Leyen and Keir Starmer. And Ursula von der Leyen agreed to $750 billion in energy trade and energy purchases, $600 billion in direct investments by the EU in the United States, an undisclosed but massive amount of US weapons that they're going to buy from the United States. And then the fact that these weapons go to Ukraine is almost irrelevant in the sense that you can transfer all the weapons you want to Ukraine. If there's nobody to wield them, it doesn't do anything to change the course of war. Remember, the thing that was critical to the British with regards to Ukraine war was for the United States to provide a security guarantee to Kiev, that is, to a Western aligned government in Kiev. Trump didn't do that. He declined this outright. And this is the only thing that could conceivably change the course of the war. And how? Because the part of the plan was for the French and the British to insert their security forces, which they called them peacekeepers, then they called them reassurance forces, to insert them into Ukraine as a tripwire force. And then when the Russians destroy those troops, then to turn to the United States and say, okay, now it's time for you to honor your obligation here. You said you were providing security guarantee. Our troops just got wiped out. You have to go and confront Russia. So that was the objective, was to bring the United States into the mix and then to escalate to a total war between United States, NATO against Russia. Trump said no. And this is the most important decision because it completely removes any possibility of the United States of going directly to war against Russia. And then for the rest of NATO to take on Russia without the American security guarantee is basically a suicidal mission. That is so obvious that I think it's impossible that people in the Trump administration, if they have brains, if they have even average IQ, that they would be insisting on unconditional ceasefire and making that a condition for talking deals with the Russians. So obviously the fact that they keep talking about this unconditional ceasefire is a psyop. Obviously, it's not obvious, but that's how I perceive it. because it's too stupid otherwise. It's just so spectacularly stupid that I cannot take it at face value. So my inclination is to think there's a different kind of a deal going on behind the curtains, behind the scenes. And so I think that we'll find out all this. I wouldn't even waste any brain space on parsing Trump's statements. He's not telling you the truth. This is misdirection. This is a deception, and I think it's aimed at the likes of Merz and Starmer and Macron and von der Leyen, so that they could still cling to the hope that Daddy is still with them and that he will bail them out eventually, and that they should spend all their money on American weapons and spend 5% of their GDP on NATO and so on. But another thing I wanted to add, because people often say, oh, enough of this 5D chess that Trump is playing, because how could, Trump, being as shallow as he comes across as, he wouldn't be playing 5D chess in this way. I'm giving him too much credit. I think that it appears as 5D chess to us because we have been systematically misinformed about what's really going on. If you're sitting in the halls of power in the government and you have your intelligence people telling you what's going on, who are on the ground in Ukraine, then this is not 5D chess. This is mafia style dealing. This is, all you need is street smarts. All you need is like a gangster mindset, and that's what you would be doing. The fact that it appears like 5D chess to us from the frog's perspective, it doesn't make it 5D chess. And so the fact that Zelensky is still president, he's illegitimate. So it's a waste of time to discuss and sign anything with him. And this is so obvious that I'm sure that the American administration, the people in the administration, perfectly understand this. So why is Trump saying all these things? I think it's, again, a psyop aimed at the leaders of the Western European nations, who are insisting that Zelensky must be included in these discussions. Why, they don't explain exactly, but they just think that's the way it should be, and they ignore the fact that Zelensky is completely illegitimate. I think that after the meeting, I suspect, and I have no evidence for this whatsoever, but I suspect that part of it is going to be that there must be a caretaker government, that Zelensky cannot sign any of this, that there will have to be a caretaker government. The legitimate representative of Ukrainian side could be the Speaker of the House, the leader of the parliament, because the Constitution of Ukraine allows for parliamentary elections to be postponed in case of a war emergency. Not the president, the Speaker of the House, the equivalent of the Speaker of the House could be the legitimate leader of Ukraine. But then part of the deal could be the early elections. And then if it turns out that the United States backs Valery Zaluzhny as the new president of Ukraine, that'll be another signal that it's a deal between Russia and I think that the Brits are not so sure about Zaluzhny. We got that Vogue press photo up of Zaluzhny, which pretty much signifies that somebody is pushing him forward. And I've noticed that this all happened from the time that Trump was meeting with Starmer in Scotland. And so it seems to me that Trump is exerting pressure for Zaluzhny to take over. And if that turns out to be the case, I very strongly suspect that's a deal between Trump and Putin. That's part of that deal. And I think this is another one of those things that are so stupid, I can't quite believe that's what they're intending to do. There are a few problems with Zelensky, and that one of them is that since May 2024, he is no longer the president of Ukraine. He's basically a military dictator. And it's very obvious that if you signed any kind of a treaty with Zelensky, some future administration could walk into the government and say, we don't recognize anything Zelensky signed because he was not legitimately the president of Ukraine, because Ukrainian constitution is very precise about the fact that president's term is 5 years and not a day longer, and it cannot be extended for any reason, and the presidential elections cannot be delayed for any reason whatsoever. War, no war, emergency, it's 5 years and that's it. Vladimir Putin doesn't take offense. He doesn't care what people say about him. They've been demonizing him for 23 years now in the Western press. I don't think Xi Jinping cares either. But what they sign on the paper, what deals they make with the United States, that's very important. And I think that Trump certainly believes that he can manage all this. And I think that he's probably right about that and I think that he's already made himself a lot more powerful than he was in his first term, partly by passing the big, beautiful bill, partly by bringing Elon Musk to his side and X changing hands from the globalist to a different manager. We have basically X is now the leading source of news for many people around the world. He's less vulnerable to the propaganda effect. The fact that they're meeting in Alaska tomorrow on Friday, 15th August, tells you that they've already agreed on a lot of important points. Otherwise, Trump and Putin wouldn't be meeting to say, hey, what are we going to do? This is all so messy. Their delegations, their representatives have already discussed a lot of these things extensively. And the fact that they were able to put this summit on so quickly tells you that they found it easy to agree on some very important issues that are important both to the Russians and to the Americans. Then I think that another score has been outing of the Russiagate documents. And I think that a very important lever of power are the Epstein files, which the administration has in their hands. And I think that they opted, instead of releasing it to the public, to use it as a political leverage. And then this week, over the weekend, he took control of Washington, D.C. He put the control of the security of Washington, D.C. under the federal government. So the mayor and the Metropolitan Police in Washington, D.C. are now controlled by the Attorney General and by extension by Trump. And so he has very much consolidated his political power in a much more robust way than he did in his first term. In his first term, he simply didn't. So he was being constantly 24/7 attacked, not only in the media and demonized ad nauseum, but he was also being constantly attacked through lawfare, through these endless impeachment proceedings and trials. And so he was politically very weak. This is not the case anymore. But the key moment will be the midterm elections. So the Republicans loyal to Trump need to retain control of the House of Representatives and the Senate. And I think that this is part of the reason why Trump is going around making himself the winner in every situation. And he's making peace here and there, improving the economic performance in the United States, and all of these things that he's constantly very boastful about. I think that's aimed at further consolidating his political position at home. And that is, I think, from his point of view, the most important priority for his government. I think that the leaders in Russia and in China and elsewhere understand this. They're not stupid. And so they understand that a lot of his bravado, a lot of his, let's call it, boorish pronouncements to the public, to the press, they serve this purpose. And I think that they don't care. And I know people will say the United States is not agreement capable and you can't trust them as far as you can throw them and so on and so forth. But having a deal is better than not having a deal, because a deal gives you at least some leverage. Yeah, maybe some future administration is going to come in and they're going to say, we don't recognize this, we're walking back out of this. But there's a lot to be done, and there's a lot to be gained for all sides, not only in terms of economic development, trade, scientific, cultural exchange, and all of these things, and peace, but also in terms of nuclear disarmament, which is another thing that Trump has mentioned a few times and people in his administration. And it is clear that whatever deal happens between the United States and Russia, they're going to be working out some kind of a nuclear disarmament deal in the future. I think these are very important things, and I think that he will be able to manage it because his key counterparts aren't paying attention to the psyops and the pronouncements that are aimed at domestic audiences. They're paying attention of what's being brought to the table and what's being discussed.